So next we have very pleased to welcome Katalin Timár to give us the next presentation. Katalin is a curator at Ludwig Museum of Contemporary Art in Budapest. Her most recent projects include Economize 2017 and most lately Tamás Király Out of the Box 2019. She was the curator of the Hungarian Pavilion at the 52nd Venice Biennale in 2007 with the participation of Andreas Fogarashi, which received the Golden Lion Award for Best National Pavilion. Congratulations. She holds a PhD in linguistics and teaches art history and theory at the Department of Aesthetics at Pázmány Péter Catholic University. She's been a member of the board of the International Association of Curators of Contemporary Art since 2015. And if John was talking about collecting and curating mail art, I think Katalin's going to introduce some ideas around theorizing mail art, frameworks and approaches being the title. She wrote her MA thesis in 1990 on mail art to examine whether a mail art from a theoretical viewpoint can demonstrate its radicalism in comparison to neo-avant-garde artistic practices, and B, to show the deficiencies of contemporary Hungarian art theory to analyse such practices. And in the paper today, she'll revisit the dissertation from 1990 and examine its thesis from the theoretical position she inhabits now. So welcome, Katalin.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank Artpool staff for this opportunity to present this paper here. The abstract sounds very highbrow. The paper might not be that highbrow, but I try to come up to some expectations. And it's funny, I would have liked to continue listening to you, and it's getting a bit nostalgic about all these anniversaries of Artpool and my MA graduation, and also we just had a conference in November with Artpool about the 30th anniversary of the change of the system, or the Berlin Wall coming down. So I try not to be that nostalgic. The present conference celebrates the 40th anniversary of Artpool's foundation, which accidentally coincides with the 30th anniversary of my graduation from ELTE University, where my MA thesis discussed certain theoretical aspects of mail art. My interest in this topic originated partly by my initial commitment to art theory on the one hand, and the fascination by mail art's seemingly infinite radicality and wittiness on the other. Between 1987 and 91, I was associated to Artpool as an intern, and one of the outcomes of these years was the thesis I put together under the supervision of Professor Katalin at the university. It was not just any writer's usual discontent that let me propose this paper, but this anniversary provides us with the opportunity to reconsider and compare art theory's previous and current positions, at least some of them maybe. In 1990, I had the intention of examining mail art from a strictly theoretical viewpoint. This decision was informed partly by the frustration I had during my studies of those art historical methods and theories in the curriculum, and partly by the recurring dualisms of contemporary Hungarian theory. The late 80s were defined by more or less two intertwining currents in this country. It was around 87 when the term postmodernism appeared within the local discourse, when the periodical Medvetánc, a joint publication of ELTE University, where I was a student, and the University of Economics, that was called Karl Marx at the time, published a questionnaire on the topic. 10 philosophers, literary, architectural, and art theorists were invited to reflect on the ways in which this term is understood or was understood in their respective areas. You see the names on the left. The three sentences the editors put forward are all raised problematic assumptions and viewpoints. I didn't translate these questions, but I just summed them up. The first and the second of these questions assume a terminological polarization between the modern and the postmodern. The third one takes the form of a question, but contains a statement according to which all these posts, like the post-material, the post-industrial, and the post-avant-garde, are merely part of a fashionable discourse and asks, so the questioner or the editors ask the invited participants to explain this fashion or trend. This suggestive formulation recurs in many answers as affirmative and often interrogative tone. One respondent, Miklós Almási, goes to the extent of abbreviating postmodernism as POM, P-O-M, like pom-pom, which is a textual strategy of ridiculing everything that is related not only to the term, but to its historiography as well. It appears as the editors and the respondents have exemplified It appears as if the editors and the respondents have exemplified Frederick Jamieson's description of the reception of postmodernism, and I quote him, "The concept of postmodernism is not widely accepted or even understood today," and it's 1984, sorry. "Some of the resistance to it may come from the unfamiliarity of the works it covers," end of quote. This is what comes out of the answers when you read them. Unfortunately, it's only in Hungarian. Most of the respondents display an understanding of philosophical terms in the spirit of German metaphysics and Hegel, sometimes complemented by the readings of certain French philosophers such as Lyotard or Foucault. Most of the answers contain quite an amount of skepticism towards postmodernism, exactly on the basis of its fashionable character. The art historian Lajos Németh connects its rise to the manipulations of the art market and finishes his contribution with the question, and I quote him, "If Jesus Christ can be a superstar, what can we expect from a postmodern artist?" End of quote. Many contributors conflate the ways in which postmodernism deals with products of mass culture in the form of cultural references, appropriation, and as objects of serious cultural analysis. Most of the answers are rather diffuse and deal very little with the visual arts and certainly don't specify the diverse usage of the notion, let alone the debates that surrounded it at the time. To the extent to which the term started to be avoided in serious discussions. This questionnaire managed to relegate the whole issue of postmodernism to obsolescence before any serious debate could have been started here in Hungary. Many seem to celebrate the end of an intellectual fashion by rejoicing its outmoded status in Western thinking, thus sparing the time and effort we should have spent with understanding it. In his contribution to the questionnaire, the philosopher Zoltán Endreffy included a small chart that compares some of the basic characteristics and principles of the modern and the postmodern societies. Speaking about these societies' ethical stance, Endreffy juxtaposes modernism's strive for possessing, the second one in the list, with the postmodernist quality of being. This strangely echoes what Géza Perneczky, a Hungarian artist and writer based in Cologne, and also a member of the mail art movement. So Géza Perneczky suggests in relation to the democratic character of mail art, and I quote him, "There are no more artists since everybody is an artist. Art is not a quality but a function of a state of being which anybody may enter. He or she only needs to correspond," end of quote. According to Endreffy, and I quote him, "Confronting the era of the modern with that of the postmodern makes sense only if the description of the postmodern society of a critique of the specificities of the postmodern society is a critique of the specificities of the modern," end of quote. Thus, on the one hand, male art and its artists are characterized by postmodernism's idea of being, but postmodernism itself is characterized by a critical attitude towards modernism, similarly to the often aggressive critique modernism and the neo-avant-garde exercise to all previously existing social and artistic forms. This is just one example from my 1990 text, which served to demonstrate the inconsistencies of the effort to compartmentalize male art and indirectly demonstrating the untenability of such theories of art that are based on simplistic dichotomies. My ideas about postmodernism have changed since then a lot. These dichotomies, or better to say, dualities, served as the foundation of theories of postmodernism in Hungarian art history and were formulated mostly by Laurent Hegyi. For many, his relatively widely published and promoted ideas, so that was already in the 80s. You see here one book that was published in 83, this in 86, and he was at the time, he was a curator in this Műcsarnok, the Kunsthalle, which is opposite the Museum of Fine Arts, and he also published many articles, so this was not part of the secondary publicity as, for instance, Artpool. So, for many, Hegyi's relatively widely published and promoted ideas on the trans-avant-garde, or as he called it, new sensibility, became synonymous with postmodernism without realizing either the narrowness of such an understanding of the term or the strong critique of neo-expressionist figurative painting by such art historians as Benjamin Buchloh as early as in 1981. As a result of a lack of sufficient theoretical works available in Hungary in the late 80s, I myself was not aware of the complexities and many-faceted nature of postmodernism, but even from the little sources I had at my disposal, it was clear that male art represented an artistic movement that fell outside the neo-avant-garde versus postmodernist polarity. It was for these reasons that I felt the need to produce a critique of these theories, and male art was not just an appropriate case study for that, but it also implored for a theoretical framework, as some writers have noted it at the time. Coming back to the questionnaire, I find it quite surprising to see retrospectively that most of the answers were striving for an all-encompassing theory, for a universal account of the postmodern condition, thus implicitly assuming that the theories of the neo-avant-garde were universal, without realizing that one of postmodernism's fundamental claims revolves around the end of the so-called grand narrative. This is perhaps the reason why the contributions are often fragmented, self-contradictory, and biased. Implicitly, I was also looking for such a comprehensive narrative, but unintentionally, my text proved the opposite, the impossibility of such a narrative in an oblique manner. In outlining the characteristics of male art, I dedicated a relatively longer section to the discussion of junk and to the ways in which junk, mostly in the form of discarded printed matters, becomes an important material source for male artists. The use of cheap materials such as junk supports the artist's endeavor of resisting commercialization and the art market, and in this respect, male art aligns itself with such neo-avant-garde movements as Fluxus. In an essay from 1983, it's not published in this book, but in one of Artpool letters, Géza Pernetsky, however, argues that a certain cult of junk appears only in countries that have lived through modernity and went beyond, that is, post. According to Pernetsky, East European and Latin American countries have not reached this level of development, yet the artists from these regions also use junk extensively. He also claims that these works often allude to different time periods. Ideologically or conceptually, they are charged with the heroic utopianism of the classical avant-garde, while their visuality reflects the postmodern age. So this duality appears in his description again. To translate Pernetsky's ideas to contemporary terminology, he speaks on the one hand about the center-periphery model and alludes to the shifting relationship between the artist and the audiences on the other. A reinterpretation of the authorship in conjunction with the changing role of the audiences, partly as it was initiated in Fluxus, is often referred to deskilling and reskilling in contemporary theory. Contemporary now. Not without any antecedent, the 2000s put forward a Marxist-oriented analysis of artistic labor that found parallels in general labor theories that were connected to forms of value. Mail art, extensive use of various means of reproduction, Xerox, rubber stamp, stencil, typewriter, collages, and so on, already questioned 19th century ideas on artistic skills, originality, and authorship. Examples for the latter are those chain letters with some initial forms that the artists sent to each other to intervene, resulting works with a semi-collective authorship. Marxist theory, however, has been very unpopular for many decades here, as it is considered to be overly ideological and was somehow an unavoidable asset of all interpretation in forms of a short tribute in every analysis that otherwise did not subscribe to it. It is a blind spot that can effectively be circumvented these days. My original thesis, and therefore this paper, did not deal with the archive either as an institutional form or the archival impulse that have been also hot topics in the contemporary art discourses for the past at least 20 years. The thesis did not analyze mail art as a field or as a lowbrow art form in Bourdieu's sense of the terms that can also could be interesting avenues of analysis. In a way, the thesis was not just a personal product, but also a text that was informed by what was available at the locality and temporality of its conception. Very short conclusion, 2 more sentences. The work I have outlined here suggests that instead of trying to squeeze mail art into existing universal theoretical frameworks, it seems more productive to set up a series of investigations into its various characteristics and manifestations. The examples I have used here are directly related to the ideas that I formulated in my thesis, but this list could be expanded much further. Every now and then, it makes sense to revisit previous investigations to reconnect artistic movements, such as mail art, to our contemporary understanding of art, culture, and the social. That's it.